Okay, so Dave Ramsey is a huge voice in personal finance. But in this video, I want to go through 5 pieces of his advice that you should not listen to. We're going to go through each one. I'll give examples. Stick around to the end. The last piece of advice is the one I think is the most egregious that can keep you from building wealth over your life. Let's jump right in. All right, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joshua. I built and sold my tech company, and now I focus on investing and teaching lessons that I've learned with you about money. I'd love for you to consider subscribing and hit that like button. It helps me out tremendously. All right, really quick, if you do not know who Dave Ramsey is, he's a huge personality in personal finance. He's written many best-selling books, but he's most famously known for the 7 baby steps, a framework for getting out of debt and starting to build wealth over your life. But they are not a one-size-fits-all framework the way that Dave likes to think they are. And let's go through the areas of which I strongly disagree with his advice. Number 1, he talks about paying off your credit card debt. This is the debt snowball approach, and his focus on getting you to pay off all of your debt as quickly as possible. But the debt snowball focuses on the smallest debt, not necessarily the debt with the highest interest rate. So for example, you have 2 credit cards, one at 2% and one at 30%. If the 2% had $100 on it and the 30% had $1,000 on it, he'd say knock out the 2% immediately and then focus on the higher interest. And I think that that is the wrong way to do it. And this is just mathematically correct because you want to pay off the higher interest debt first that's costing you the most money. His claim is that there's a psychological benefit to knocking out a smaller debt and seeing progress along the way. And this may be true for you, but when I paid off over $40,000 of student loan debt, I went after the highest interest rate first. I started to look at those different lines and said, wait, this one's 6%. Let's get out of this thing. And that's what I would recommend for you is, focus on the higher interest debt. The return is just mathematically better. All right, number 2, he talks about paying off debt prior to investing for retirement. And this is a controversial opinion because if you work at your employer where there is a 401k match, where they will contribute to your retirement, that effectively is free money. A lot of people will approach this with their debt as saying, hey, I will contribute to retirement. I'm going to contribute up to my employer match so that I get that free investment in my future and don't put all that on pause just while I pay off the debt. I'm going to try to do both at the same time. And that's probably the approach I would recommend. I think if your employer's matching your contributions, you should be focused on the near term and the long term simultaneously with your money. All right, number 3, Dave likes to say that you should invest in mutual funds, but I strongly disagree with that approach. I prefer investing in exchange traded funds or ETFs. And there's many reasons for this, primarily that mutual funds typically have a minimum investment threshold. This example here with Vanguard, we're looking at a growth mutual fund. There's a $3,000 minimum, but if we look at the ETF equivalent, that is just the price of a single share, which is about $220 as I film this video. The other thing I love about ETFs is they trade like a stock, so you can see the price action throughout the day. But the most important thing, and the reason I disagree so strongly about the mutual funds, are the expenses. If you look at the same example, the Vanguard US Growth Fund investor share has an expense ratio of 0.38%. Comparing that over with the ETF, it has an expense ratio of 0.04%. And if you look at this comparison over time, you can see that a $10,000 investment with $5,000 contributed each year, growing at 8% over 30 years, you're actually going to pay $48,000 in fees over that investment period for the mutual fund compared to just $5,000 for the ETF. And that is significant. And depending on the size of your portfolio and how much that accumulates over your life, we're talking a lot of money here. Okay, and that brings me to number 4, which is kind of this combination of Dave's approach to a one-size-fits-all financial recommendation, and then his anger around implementing that. And what I mean is, and just using that example, going back to number 3, sometimes I think the advice is for his target market, which is people who are really in debt. They have no financial literacy, and this is going to cover 80% of those people. And even with the expense ratios, it's, hey, they're just hoping they have enough money to retire. They're not going to have a $20 million portfolio where the fees are truly significant numbers. And maybe that's his thinking. But what I'll say is there's a lot of different areas where the one size approach does not work. And I think his tone when he talks to people through financial problems on his radio show, there's this kind of like condescending, reprimanding tone that belittles a lot of the callers, I think. He makes them out to sound foolish. He makes them out to sound that he is so much superior and more intelligent when it comes to money. And I don't think that approach works for everyone. I understand he's passionate and he can get angry because he gets mad at poor choices, that he wants to help people. But I don't think that is going to bring people along. You need to get them awareness, and you need to show them the way, not condemn them for their mistakes in the past. Now, he would probably say, hey, that's the tough love they need to hear. And sure, that could work. But I don't think it works for everyone. It definitely wouldn't work for me. I would guess the same for many of you. All right, last up, number 5, what I think is the most egregious advice is Dave Ramsey says you should use all cash if you want to invest in a real estate investment property. Think about what he's saying. You need to do all these baby steps, get out of debt, start investing for retirement, start to give, all these things, which are great. Pay off your house, your current home residence. But if you decide that you want to build wealth through real estate, one of the most prominent ways to build wealth that exists in the world, you need to save up cash. It's crazy. If that's your approach, then you effectively are choosing to not participate in real estate in one of the biggest wealth building vehicles that's available to you. Because depending on your income and your situation, it could take your whole life to afford the cash for a separate property. That's why most investors use leverage in a responsible way to find deals and educate themselves on how to go after real estate using smaller pieces of cash, using loans, and accumulating wealth through appreciation, through cash flow, and just building out a portfolio with other people's money. And I think the reason that Dave is so much against this is because of his own failures. He was over leveraged in a real estate portfolio that failed. And so a lot of times when you get advice from people who have failed, they're projecting their failure on you. And I'm not a fan of that. It's like if I took that advice from people when it came to starting my business, I would not be as successful as I am now. And so when it comes to investing in real estate, yes, you want to have your personal finances in order. You want to be investing for retirement. But if you want to invest in real estate, to do so just with cash is, I think, foolish and not the right advice that you should be listening to. All right, so that's the top 5 pieces of Dave Ramsey's advice that I do not listen to, and I would suggest you consider not listening to either. And if you want to learn how I actually paid off my debt, that whole story, I'll link that video in the description. It's one of the first YouTube videos I ever made. But yeah, there's plenty of different stories like this I've shared on my channel. Check them out, subscribe. We will see you again in the next video.